Hey, coworkers.
Welcome to Coworkers in Crime, the podcast where office chatter meets crime discussion.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Crystal.
Yes, we really do work together.
And yes, we're totally obsessed with true crime.
From water cooler whispers to cold case deep dives,
we're here to bring you stories that keep us chatting way past our coffee breaks.
So grab your coffee,
lock your desk drawer, and let's get into this week's case.
Okay, Crystal, we're going to Wahoo, Nebraska, a small town. One of those places where if something bad happens, people don't forget it in 5 minutes. They remember it for decades.
And this one, they really did, because the victim was a teenager, Mary Kay Heese, 17. She goes missing on March 25th, 1969, and not long after midnight, early March 26th, she's found on the roadside and she'd been stabbed.
And the reason this case stays so heavy, it's not just a cold case story. It's what happens when a community waits more than half a century for justice, and then the quote-unquote ending doesn't feel like an ending.
And before we get into it, here's a question I want to ask our listeners. What does justice even look like when the crime is older than most of the people demanding answers? Let your mind sink into that, Rachel. That's
Good
just
question.
I know. But I guess that happens. I mean, that happens.
There's a lot of cases where like the kids are trying to get justice for a grandparent or a mother. And in some cases, they were a baby when it happened and they're still fighting for justice as adults.
Or like they never met their older sibling and they want to know, I never got to know my big sister because she was taken. But also, prior to getting too deep into this, I do want to say that this episode came from one of our remote coworkers. So last week we got to meet one of Rachel and my actual coworkers. This is from someone that reached out and said, you really need to look into the Wahoo case. And once we did, we really understood why.
So let's get started.
Okay. Let me tell a little bit about the story. And then I would like, Rachel, if you'll start helping me kind of go through the timeline a bit. Let me tell you about the night it happened and how she was found. So Mary Kay was last seen in town on March 25th, 1969, at the corner of 12th and Lincoln in Wahoo. Her parents report her missing that evening, and the community starts to search for her. Near midnight, a farmer spots Mary Kay's school book and purse stacked neatly on a rural road outside of town. He brought them into Wahoo and encountered the police that were searching. So police returned to the spot where he found the books, and that's where they discover Mary Kay's body lying in a ditch on the side of the road a few miles outside of Wahoo. Investigators found her shoes in the road, tire tracks, and shoe prints near the scene. The autopsy determined that she had been beaten and stabbed. What they believed that night, and that was a theory based on evidence and later investigation, a witness says that at around 5 p.m., they see her getting into a car with two men. Investigators believe she knew them, part of the reason they think she got into the car. Former investigator Ted Green's theory is that the two men drove her to a local hangout area, the Grove, and at some point, Mary Kay realized that their intentions were foul, and then she fled the car. Evidence at the scene includes the preserved footprints due to the freezing ground. It led investigators to believe she was running hard to escape, and she was chased down, and that's where they left her. That's the best reconstruction version that I can pull together.
They thought they had a key person, Wayne Greaser, for a pretty simple reason. His name kept surfacing alongside Joseph Ambrose anytime investigators tried to reconstruct who Mary Kay was with that day. And investigators' theory is that two men were involved, not just one. What made Greaser key, according to the strongest public reporting, two-men theory. The witness reported seeing Mary Kay get into a car with two men the afternoon she disappeared. That made the whole "who is the second man" question central. Names that kept coming up in the investigation over the years, Ambrose and Greaser were repeatedly the pair mentioned together. Officially named as the co-conspirator when the case ended in a plea, the agreement named Greaser as the other person in the alleged conspiracy to kill Mary Kay. That's basically the state saying, this is who we believe was involved with the defendant. Greaser died by suicide in 1977, which is huge in cold cases because if he was involved or if he knew what happened, investigators lost the chance to question him or confront him with newer evidence. So key doesn't necessarily mean they had a slam dunk proof. It means he was one of the few people repeatedly linked to the core theory of what happened, and his death removed the most direct path to the answers.
Yeah. So if we're just doing like a high timeline, this happens on March 25th, right? She goes missing. Family reports are missing, and then after midnight, they find her. In 77 is when Greaser dies. So in the 90s, they start interviewing Ambrose again. In 99, Nebraska State Police cold case push and forensic retestings are attempted, and then 48 hours follows up. In 2015, Ted Green is assigned to the case and he starts the rebuild. In 2020, they publish case study. They start to describe the ongoing efforts to uncover new evidence. And then in 2015 through 2023, so kind of a little backstep of what was happening for 2020 to happen, the consolidation of tips, they renew the theory work, and the groundwork is laid for grand jury. Cases like this, the first question everyone asks is who's she last with? And the second is, what did she do that day? And that's where you feel how fast a small town starts spinning because everyone has a version. Everyone heard something, or everyone knows a guy who knows a guy.
Exactly. And over the years, investigators looked at a lot of people connected to the case. Some reporting says hundreds. This was one of those cases where the sheriff's office kept the file active, never officially closed, just dormant until someone pulled it back out.
And what I want listeners to keep in mind, not solved doesn't mean ignored. Sometimes it just means you don't have something you can put in front of a jury and actually win. Not You're not going to get a conviction.
Yeah, suspicion and proof are not the same thing.
Let me ask you this. What do you think makes this one so haunting? Because we cover a lot and some cases fade faster than others.
I think it's a combination of things. It's a young girl, she's a teenager, it's a small town, and the fact that it becomes a generational story. This isn't just like a story that comes and goes, it gets woven into the fabric of this small town. And parents tell their kids about it. Kids grow up talking and still talking about it. And the details were brutal. She'd been stabbed multiple times and beaten. That kind of collective memory just doesn't let go.
Yeah, something about generational story just gave me a weird chill, you know?
And
I mean,
this one reminds me of one I think I was telling you about it that happened in New England. A young girl goes missing. She's later found deceased, and then it just gets woven into the fabric of the town because it's a small town and everyone talks about it. And then I think when everyone's talking about it, then you get those little almost like, these, I don't want to say mythical, but, like it
tall
gets
tale, it
tall
gets
tales,
stretched.
it gets stretched and it just starts to take its own path. And then you gotta start separating, well, what's fact from fiction? And I just think it just spirals from there, especially when they go on for decades because you wanna be part of the conversation when you're a kid. You remember that, you're in school
Oh,
and you
yeah.
wanna be part of the conversation, so you make
I
something up potentially off of something you heard.
I remember there was a Sarah Jane Road growing up, and it's based on a true story. It's something that actually happened, but over the years, it was like, oh, don't go down that road at night. You know, she's still there, and I'm sure a lot of my local coworkers from where we grew up together know exactly what I'm talking about because the story was original at one point, and then it grew into this myth and it grew into this folklore. And I mean, think about Bloody Mary and all the games we played. Those were original stories. But your answer, what you just said, leads to the question I was going to ask you because I think you answered it. I mean, when a case becomes this style of, folklore and it's woven into which I love how you say that, it's like woven into the fabric of the town, does it bury the truth? Or is this helping investigators, or does it cause a problem where it's really hard to tell what's real anymore? I think you answered it perfectly prior to me being able to ask you, but I think it makes it harder, really, because you don't know what's real
Yeah.
anymore because
You
people just.
right, you have to, like, separate everything out.
So here's the decades of dark problem. The case starts hot in 69. People are getting questioned, tips are flying in, but then time does what time does. Witnesses age, people move. Someone who was the talk of the town becomes just a name in a file, but evidence doesn't get better with age. And the longer it goes, the harder it is to untangle what's real and what gets repeated, like we were saying. It's woven in.
And one thing that stands out in the later coverage, there's an early person, Wayne Greaser, tied to this case who later dies by suicide in 1977. So if investigators believed he knew something, that's a huge door slamming shut.
And that part always gets people because if it triggers the what if, it starts then leading into what if that's a key and what if that was a missing piece?
And then you get into the cold case era. Agencies started revisiting old cases with new tools, new databases, and fresh eyes. There's renewed attention around the late 1990s and into the 2000s. 48 Hours started covering this case in 1999, and they kept checking back in over the years.
Because the whole culture of cold cases changed. People start believing, okay, with all this new tools and new database that you're mentioning, maybe we can solve what we couldn't solve before.
Then in the 2010s is where this case gets rebuilt in a serious way. Like, not just reopen the file, reread it, all the notes, but reconstruct the entire story. Prosecutors said they spent years consolidating decades of interviews, tips, and statements, trying to build something coherent enough to take to court.
It's honestly what it takes sometimes. Someone who's stubborn enough to go, I'm not letting this die in a cabinet.
And here's a question I think about a lot. When a case is this old, are investigators solving the crime or solving the investigation?
I don't like that. But that's, yeah, because then it's like, what did we miss? So it's not necessarily that you're solving the case, you're solving what did we miss. That, at least that's what that makes me. Is that how you think of it? What did we miss?
Well, I mean, when you think about cases that are like 50 years old and being solved, I mean, either the person is in their later years or they may have passed. And what may not have been solvable at the time of the crime because of advancements in science and techniques becomes solvable. So I still view it as you're solving the crime. You're closing the door on any other
Yeah.
possibility. So because, it's like you can't look back at things and be like, "Well, you missed that." Well, they didn't have DNA like we do
Y-
now. You know,
Absolutely.
they
Yeah.
knew they could do blood typing.
See, your question makes me think of like what we talked about on the case with Tracy. There's things that investigators just didn't do that they should have. They should have done this. They should have done this. But at the time, it was like, oh, this is nothing. Let's move on. And ignored something that was pretty important to the investigation because at the time it didn't look important. And so that's how it makes me think. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, some of it they couldn't. Another one, how much weight should we give the memories that are 40, 50, 55 years old? I mean, I barely remember something that happened 55 minutes ago. But when something terrible happens, everything slows down and your brain kicks into this something's off mode and everyone says, "Oh, time slowed down or time started to crawl."
How much weight can you put into them? I think you can put some weight into them because if someone saw something happen, it's kind of like when something major happened in history. You know, when John F. Kennedy is assassinated, you ask
Mhm.
anyone from that generation, they can tell you exactly where they were, probably
Yep.
what they were wearing, what
Yep.
they were doing the moment they heard about it happening. So
Mhm.
like I think when something happens like that, it it's just permanent on your
Yeah,
brain.
it slows that brain down. I remember exactly where I was when the first plane hit in 9/11. I remember what I was doing when the second plane was announced, and I was like, "What is happening?" I mean, what I was wearing, you're right. I remember
Yep,
exactly
I
where I
can.
was, what I was
Same.
wearing, who was standing near me. Absolutely. So let's go into the arrest and the plea. So after all that time, this is the part where we go, wait, it finally happened. In 2024, U.S. Marshals arrest Joseph Ambrose in Oklahoma in connection to Mary Kay. At first, the vibe is maybe this is the moment. The trial, the full story is going to come to the public. The finally, quote unquote.
But then the case takes a turn. That becomes the biggest controversy. Instead of a full murder trial, prosecutors go for a plea deal. In July 2025, a judge accepts a no contest plea to conspiracy to commit first degree murder, but not murder. And no contest plea means that the defendant isn't admitting guilt, but they're also not fighting the charge. It ends the case without a trial and without the defendant having to say, I did it.
Yeah, and conspiracy means prosecutors believed he participated in planning and helped the crime, but they didn't think they could prove he personally committed the stabbing.
It's along the same lines as the Alford plea. The difference is in a no contest plea, the defendant is saying, I'm not admitting I did it, but I'm not fighting the charge. And in the Alford plea, they're saying, I maintain I'm innocent, but I recognize the prosecution has enough evidence to convict me. So, though they're actually different pleas, which I guess I was thinking they were the same thing, just word choices, but they're not. They're different. So the Alford plea, you're maintaining your innocence, but admit that the prosecution probably has enough to get you. And the no contest, you're not admitting you did it, but you're not fighting the charge either.
I want to put this in a history of, because that's interesting. I never knew that. And what would cause you, like, this is not a rabbit hole we're going to fall down right now, but if you think about, why wouldn't he have just taken an Alford plea? Or maybe, I mean, this is just a year ago, 2 years ago. Why didn't he just take an Alford plea and say, okay, yeah, I'm maintaining my innocence. He chose no contest for a reason. So I'd love to go through the different pleas you can take and the different charges.
Mhm.
That would be neat to go down, because I learned something right then. I guess I was always blending those.
But this back to this case, and the kicker, and I'm not sure I agree with this part, but I get it, is the law they had to base the sentencing on had to be the law that was in place in 1969, which means in this case, the maximum penalty was 2 years. Nebraska's sentencing laws in 1969 were dramatically different than they are today.
And then the release happens. Reporting says he's released in November of 2025.
Here's a question that may hit hard. If the law ties your hands, is a prosecutor doing the right thing by taking the deal or the wrong thing by not risking a trial?
I mean, this reminds me of Idaho 4, because they took a plea. They didn't leverage anything for the plea, because the prosecutors verbally, what they put out is, we didn't want to put the victims through trial. We really didn't want to do that. These are kids. They're in college. They're already traumatized. If we can get a plea. The problem is that was only if they took the death penalty off the table. That was what the defense wanted. We'll take it off the table. He'll serve life. But they didn't have him say, here's where I put the knife. They didn't have him do anything for a plea. That's the part that frustrated people. We can get over the fact that we didn't go to trial and never get the full truth. But how did we not get any resolution? So when you ask this question, why were we willing to take a plea? Because, like you said, instead of going to trial, prosecutors start immediately going for a plea deal. To me, why? Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we risk trial? And maybe it has to do with, that's why he didn't take an Alford plea, because you were saying that means, so that kind of, like, maybe that I just answered my own question of, why did he take no contest instead of an Alford? Like, Alford was more to do with the evidence against than the no contest is. But that's really annoying. I mean, it's got to be something the prosecutor knew better. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a lawyer. I don't claim to be. But man, it's got to be that they made a choice. It's got to be a hard choice. The only reason I assume it's a hard choice is because this is a hard pill to swallow.
And I know that in most jurisdictions, the prosecutors do talk with the families about the plea deal, about
Hmm.
accepting the plea deal. But unfortunately, the families don't have a veto power. Like, they can't say no.
Yeah.
They can strongly object, but the prosecutor can still offer and accept that plea because, the prosecutor represents the state, not the family.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's where families can start to feel, betrayed or let down by the system. But if that's the only way to get, like, if the evidence isn't strong enough to get that conviction of, in this case, first degree murder, then is the best route to get a plea deal, which is a convict. They're still convicted. They're saying, but they took the plea deal for a lesser charge.
Well, and I
Uh,
don't know if you remember me saying this before. I think we talked about it in orientation, but sometimes this feels like we're running through a legal system here, not a justice system. It's about, what is the legal resolution, and is that the same thing as justice? And I will tell you, I will bet more people feel like justice wasn't served than people who feel justice was. And most of the time, it's just, we had to go through the legal system. So this is the part that feels uniquely Wahoo. People did not just shrug. They were protesting outside courtrooms or the courthouse um, over this plea deal. So they're outside protesting.
Yeah, like I was just mentioning, the family reaction was raw. One relative said they felt ignored in the process. Another described it as feeling like the system threw the case away, like it got discarded all over again.
And that's the local feeling in a nutshell, right? I mean, we waited. our whole lives. Some people were younger than the case, and it ended with paperwork. Ew.
So here's the biggest controversy cleanly. The plea deal delivered a legal outcome, but robbed the community of a full public accounting. No full trial means no full narrative under oath, and that leaves people with the same questions they've had for decades. What exactly happened that night, and is there more to it?
And here's the question that I'd ask a prosecutor. Does the community deserve the truth, even if the courtroom didn't get to deliver it? I mean, that, yeah. I don't think they feel that way though. I think that a prosecutor is thinking, look, legally, how do we attach this crime to this person? Because I will tell you what's more important in the long run, and I can tell you this from my own firsthand experience with what happens when you're a victim of any kind of violent crime. It's so much better if there's some history attached, not like, oh, this happened, not word of mouth. You have to have a conviction attached to the person. Charges are not good enough, and neither is word of mouth. When you have an actual conviction attached to somebody, if this guy is ever in trouble for anything else again, at least this is attached to him. Typically, people become repeat offenders, but I don't know. I guess if I'm a prosecutor, I'm thinking objectively. Of course, the community deserves the truth, but if the best you can get is an attachment to this person, maybe that's the best way to go.
And here's a question for you. Is closure possible when the story feels like it's still incomplete?
I mean, the fast answer is no to me. I mean, I bet you that family, none of what we think really matters. It's the family and the
Right.
locals, the people who feel it. I mean, no, that's not that's not closure. It's definitely not closure. So that's the Wahoo story. A teen disappears, a town never forgets, decades pass, and when the case finally moves, people don't get the resolution, and it isn't proportional to the loss.
And what stays with me is how many people carried this case like a weight, not because they knew Mary Kay personally, but because the story became part of the town's identity. It shaped how people raised their kids. It shaped how they talked about danger. And it shaped how they remembered 1969.
Mm, yeah. I don't know why when you say that stuff, it gives me chills, but it does. I mean, I can imagine the way I would raise my child would be different. And now, even with the plea, a conviction and a release, the questions aren't going to just go away. They just shift. They just become what really happened that night, who else knew something, uh, what was lost in the decades that we can never get back.
And maybe the hardest one is justice still justice when it arrives 56 years late and in a form no one expected?
Yeah, that's the part that lingers. I mean, because the court can close a file, but a community doesn't close that easily. You can't stop this train at this point. Like you said, people are raising their kids differently. They're talking about the summer of '69 way differently than the rest of us are, and you're impacted forever that way. So it's not that simple. This just lingers.
And cases like this remind us that truth and closure aren't the same thing. Sometimes all you can do is hold space for the story, honor the person at the center of it, and acknowledge that people never stopped caring.
Mary Kay Heese was 17. She shouldn't have lost her life that early. She had a whole life to live. And at least we can do some sort of justice by making sure her story doesn't disappear again. So I really appreciate Susie bringing us this story. Love you, mean it. Wonderful soul sister I got to meet. And I really appreciate you bringing this case. I really hope we did it some sort of justice. I will tell you, just telling the story, obviously, I don't mean justice to the case, but justice telling it, because I imagine that our experience investigate or like digging through it and trying to find what the investigation put out there. I don't even know that we do it justice talking about how that impacted this town. And I do hope those of you listening from Wahoo feel at least that we covered it, the impact somewhat okay. I mean, I can't imagine the impact. This is an immeasurable impact, right?
Well, I mean, and it's still a small town. I mean, according to the 2020 census, there was 4,800 people.
Yeah.
That's a small
Yeah.
town.
That's a very small town. I mean, when and this name Mary Kay is probably known by every single person from
Mhm.
the ages of 10 to, if it, from the sounds of
And
it,
on up.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
and I
are
would bet
told about it.
if you
Mhm.
move into town, I'm sure you hear about this case. And
Absolutely.
I just hope that, yeah, that we did it, we with dignity and, didn't I don't wanna say gave it the justice it needs, that's not the right term, what
Yeah, see, I was stumbling too. Yeah, that we, and, I don't know. I mean, we can't serve any justice on it, of course, but we gave it the diligence. Did we put the proper care into it? I don't know.
I think we put the care into every story we put out there.
Yeah, it's interesting because almost everything we've done, some of them, like we're doing history of, I still find some sort of electricity in knowing where those amendments come from and knowing why our history has been shaped the way it is. But man, when we talk about real people, real cases, when we really deep dive into stuff like this, there's something about the way we break it down. I feel it, and sometimes it's when you ask a simple question about how this is now shaping the way people raise their kids in this area. Yeah, that's an electric feel, and I feel for those people. That's terrifying.
I agree. Oh, okay. Well, this was a doozy of a case. Thanks to your friend.
Yeah, thank you, Susie, for being our first remote coworker to bring us a case that we were able to cover.
So keep sending them in. We will add them to our list.
And until next time,
Till next time.
bye, coworkers. That wraps up this week's episode.
Thanks for listening, whether you're at your office, at your home, or somewhere in between. We're glad you're here.
Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Like what you heard, leave us a review and share it with your coworkers.
Got a case you want us to cover or office drama that feels criminal? Send it to us at coworkers.crimepodcast@gmail.com or check the episode notes for all of our social handles. Until next time, coworkers.
Stay curious, stay safe, and stay caffeinated.